Okay, hello, everybody. I am Carol Stone, co-chair of the Environmental Concerns Speaker here series, and I am here with my co-chair, Jeanette, right there. And our speaker tonight is Jill Ryan, who is from Executive Director of Freshwater Futures. She received her bachelor's degree in biology from Grand Valley State College in Michigan, her master's degree in zoology from the University of Maine, and her law degree from Case Western Reserve University in Ohio. She has a background in nonprofit management and capacity building, environmental toxicology, and human services, and has taught environmental law and legal research. Jill has held positions with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and is now the executive director of Freshwater Future, where she has been since the year 2000. Aside from building the Freshwater Future event site, her passion focuses on increasing grassroots capacity to protect waters in the Great Lakes region, including assisting with a variety of planning process, board development, facilitation, and binational collaboration. Anyway, there's many other things that she does, and she is, we in the West Coast have focused a lot on climate changes and in the sense of the oceans mostly, and sea level rise. And this is really a chance for us to learn about the effects of climate change in more detail, having to do with freshwater. And also the Freshwater Futures is focusing a lot on the quality of drinking water. For example, the Flint water crisis and lead in the water, but there are drinking water issues in many, many places. So she's going to touch upon all of this, and she's a wonderful resource. So Jill.
Thank you so much, Carol. That's very kind. And I am going to share my screen and get us started here. All right. Can everyone see that picture of the globe there?
Yes. We can
Yes.
see her while she's speaking. Okay.
All right. So as Carol said, I've been doing this for a little while. Freshwater Future was started about almost 30 years ago now, and I've been there only 23. And we're really focused on these amazing Great Lakes, but not exclusively. We are focused on these because they hold 20% of the Earth's fresh water and 90% of the country's fresh surface water. And so we also expand outside of the Great Lakes states as well, just because we need to work together on these things. So we do work with a lot of community groups, even in California. We've done quite a bit partnering with groups there. There we go. So I just want to tell you a little bit more about Freshwater Future, and then I'll go into some of the things that we're working on around freshwater, including climate work and drinking water, but some of the other things that I think you'll also relate to that are certainly challenges nationwide or worldwide. So we consider our programs to be wraparound services. We serve around 2,000 community organizations throughout the Great Lakes. We actually have a 501c3 organization, Freshwater Future, in the US, and then we have a charitable organization, Freshwater Future Canada, on the Canadian side, because these lakes don't stop at the border. So we work in the 8 Great Lakes states and Ontario primarily. We've given out around 1,300 grants now to those groups around the region for them to be able to protect their own water resources. We're a group that we don't want to come in and pretend we have the answers locally. What we want to do is help support the answers that the community already knows. So that's what we focus on. The second piece is capacity building. We have over 100 years experience on our staff with running nonprofits. And so we do kind of soup to nuts on capacity building. I do a lot on incorporating and getting 501c3 status for organizations. We do every kind of planning, strategic planning, planning for campaigns, succession planning, fundraising, all kinds of things. If a nonprofit needs it, we probably do it. We build websites, we build databases, all that sort of fun stuff. And then our third area is really policy. We focus on what we learn from these 2,000 groups across the region. What things are overlapping? What is going on in more than one community? And can we find a policy solution that will help to mitigate that issue? So we do work a lot on policy, and I'll talk a little bit later about one of our biggest policy issues right now is trying to ensure that people in the Great Lakes don't have their water turned off. We think that's pretty important for this water-rich region, that we should not be turning people's water off because they don't have the ability to pay. All right, so this is where we work. I'm sure you're familiar with the Great Lakes. I grew up in the Great Lakes, and when I'm not around them, I miss them very much. When I was away for about 10 years in grad school and working, and it seems to be part of my DNA to really focus on these amazing resources. So, as I said, this is a lot of the Earth's and the country's fresh water here. 42 million people drink water. Their drinking water comes from the Great Lakes and the connected waters. We have a $6 trillion economy, the third largest economy in the world when you combine the Canadian and US sides of the Great Lakes. And that's not by happenstance, of course. That's because these lakes have and continue to drive commerce, both shipping, but also many industries that are located on the lakes. Just the state of Michigan alone has a $15 billion a year hunting, fishing, and wildlife industry. A really significant number of people come to Michigan in particular for the lakes and what the lakes create in the state of Michigan. Very, very beautiful place if you haven't had a chance to be there. And what I think of and what I think we've seen our research bear out is that the Great Lakes become home to people who live there. We even when you're not living there, you still feel like that they define home for us. And I think that's a really unique thing. We all have home wherever we are. We all create that. But the lakes are definitely a part of that for us. So I'm going to run through some more resource extraction issues, just to give you a flavor of some of the things that impact us and that will definitely be impacted by climate change. Although the Great Lakes will not have the same issue with sea level rise, we have already seen much faster changes in lake levels. Lakes are usually at a 30-year interval between the highs and the lows. And we've had those highs and lows and them go to record highs and lows just in the last 3 years. So we've gone from a 30-year cycle to a 3-year cycle. It may not stay that way, but that's what happened, and that had never occurred before in the recorded history of lake levels. So it is quite quite daunting, the prospect of climate change and how it will impact the Great Lakes. One of the things that we're concerned about is in this slide, you can see the Mackinac Bridge. That's a 5-mile long bridge. And those 2 pipelines run under the water there. They move millions of gallons of tar sands oil daily. And it's a huge battle right now to see whether we can close them down. They are 63 years old. They were, their life expectancy was 50 years. And we're very concerned that this is between Lakes Michigan and Huron, where those 2 lakes come together. It has the most amazing currents. But if there were an oil spill there, it would really spread that oil in ways we could not contain, because the surface and the water underneath are moving in all different directions. So this is one of the types of things we're very concerned about. And as climate change is happening and we have bigger currents, bigger winds, we have bigger storm events in the Great Lakes, these kinds of, especially old pipelines, are of great concern. This pipeline is unsupported in some places. It's supposed to be supported, but the company has not repaired the stanchions that it sits on. So that's the type of thing that really concerns us in terms of resource extraction and transportation around the region. Additionally, mining. This is a map of northern Michigan and northern Wisconsin, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And each of the red dots is a place that somebody wants to mine. And all of the blue dots are drinking water sources, water wells. So you can see that there is so much concern about how do we mine this. A few of these mines do exist. The Eagle Mine is operating outside of Marquette. And we're concerned that now they want to open pit mines. They're proposing the largest open pit mine in the country for Wisconsin in the Great Lakes. And if that acid mine drainage would get into the lakes, it would be catastrophic. In terms of climate change with this, we know that when these permits are requested, those pits for storing the mining tailings and waste are never engineered as much as they will need to be for climate change. And so that's one of the big worries, is if the states and the federal government allow this kind of open pit mining in the Great Lakes that has not happened before, because the rock is sulfide bearing, it will create acid mine drainage, and then that will probably be very susceptible to the large storm events we're now having already with climate change.
Where
So
does your former governor that's in the cabinet now, where is she on these issues? She's energy secretary.
Yes. Well, I will say that they've stopped a few things. We've been fighting a mine in Minnesota for a long time, and lo and behold, it is now not getting its permits suddenly. So there are some good things happening because of Jennifer Granholm, and we hope that we can make some of those permanent for sure, but that's a great question.
Well, she was here for a while.
Oh, was she?
Berkeley. Yeah, she was teaching at
Okay.
the Goldman School.
Excellent. Yeah. So another concern here is wetland destruction. Wetlands in the Great Lakes, over 60% of the historic wetlands have been destroyed over time. And yet that is what, of course, protects the water, filters out the toxins and prevents flooding. This particular photo is what they call bottomland grooming. And so what you're seeing is during a low period of the lakes where they can drop, 6 feet, 10 feet, that could mean hundreds of feet out from where they used to be. So, when you get a 6-foot drop in elevation, it can take the water many hundreds of feet offshore, what used to be shore. And this is a huge problem because what's supposed to happen is those wetland plants come back and it becomes an emergent wetland. But what property owners don't like this, and particularly business owners. And so they want to go in and plow those weeds under that are in those wetlands. So as climate change is creating bigger highs and bigger lows for the lakes, this is going to become a bigger issue because people's cottages can be now hundreds of feet from the water in 1 year and then have huge waves crashing up at the front door a few years later. So big concerns, and that was a huge concern recently during the Buffalo storm, because just south of there, it was really battering the shoreline and at the front door of houses. I see a hand from Frank.
His wife Louise. Yeah, we're just happened to be Michiganders. And question, you said there were 30-year cycles, and now they're 3-year cycles. What was generating 30-year cycles, and what is now? I mean, I understand. I don't really understand. So,
well, yeah, it is. I don't think we know what creates the 30-year cycles, but we've seen them over time. So since they've been recording lake levels, that tends to be the cycling. And I do have a hydrograph here. Let's see, here we go. So this is an example of how they track lake levels. And you can see we have, these are quite recent, 2019, 2020, and 2021 on the left. And essentially for those 30-year cycles, we don't know what created those, but that tended to be the historic norm, that you would, over that time, you'd have slowly rising lake levels. They would get to a certain level, which we call a record, and then they would start to go back down, and then they would be at the low. And they tended to be between highs and lows. And legal definitions were created from those regular highs and lows. But now we had record highs, and now we're going into, you can see the projection for potential record low on Lake Huron, Lake Michigan. And that is because of climate change just changing our weather patterns. So what we're seeing is sorry, go ahead.
I mean, so we go back to Michigan enough. So, like you get these big storms, so the goes up, and then maybe, so it's kind of this erratic weather pattern that we're experiencing all over the world, really.
It is. And then in addition to that, when we're having warmer temperatures in the winter.
Yeah.
So right now the lakes aren't frozen. They should be frozen.
Right.
And so we have evaporation happening all the time when there's not ice on. And that is having a huge impact on taking water out. Also, the snowpack is one way that we return a lot of water to the lakes in the spring, and that snowpack is changing as well.
Yeah,
so we don't know how this is going to shake out. It's a great point, but we do know that we've never seen a high and a low come so quickly after each other.
So the way you brought it up with the wetlands, it's more dramatic, where people are reacting to this ebbing and flowing of the lake levels. And yeah, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Thank you for that. I'm just going to back up a little bit. Oops, I went in the wrong direction, I think. There we go. apologize. I'm not always the best with slideshows. So that was, keep going the same direction, even though I don't want to. Oh goodness, I stopped screen sharing. I'm really get you back here. There we go. All right. So I am gonna still try and back up. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. So flooding has become a huge problem in certain parts of the area. I know that's global. We have, as we have bigger storm events and changes in the way those patterns are happening. This is just outside of Detroit. Detroit had 3 flooding events in one summer that were catastrophic like this. And it had another one last year. And it's a combination of things, really. It's the storm events and the way they're tracking, and they're much larger than they used to be, the ones that have been hitting Detroit. But also, Detroit treats the stormwater runoff for 78 other communities north of the city. And so when those northern communities release their water, it ends up in the city. And so this is a huge problem that we're working on, but from the perspective of how you manage those things, we're going to have to get much better at looking at the timing of our stormwater. Not only how do we hold it, do we put it in deep tunnels? Do we have basins underground? Do we have above ground basins? But also, when can we release those basins, and how do we track all of that? So I think that's going to be a new area of science, because that's so important already, let alone as climate continues to move
Yeah, that's
forward.
what California has.
Can you say a little bit more about that?
Oh, well, we just had, how many was it? 4 or 5, extreme weather events between,
I have been noticing
Christmas
that.
and early January. And
Wow.
what happens is that it overflows the areas where it's supposed to be collecting, but it doesn't add anything to it because it just keeps going, and then you don't get the water underground, and you get massive destruction along the coasts. And we're yes.
Yeah. These are going to be ongoing problems, but these are the types of things that too I think that we have to start to really look at. And Detroit, to its credit, it has the most monitored stormwater system in the world, they believe.
Really?
It has monitors all over the system trying to get a handle on exactly this. When do you allow this pond to be drained? When do you allow one on the other side to be drained? How do we keep that storm water flowing down to the treatment plant without having overflows and backups into people's houses? And so they truly are working on it, but it is Herculean. This system in Detroit serves 123 communities for drinking water and 78 communities for storm and wastewater. So, and they serve 4.2 million people. So it's a pretty big system that isn't as coordinated as we would like it to be yet.
Yeah,
I have a maybe simple question, but Detroit, as you know, I suspect, has an enormous amount of salt mines under the city. And they use the salt when there's ice to break it all up. How does that affect various, I know the way it affects the bottoms of cars, they rust out, but how does it affect pipes and drinking water and other systems?
That's why we all want California cars. We're buying a used one.
That's why they bring the Michigan cars to California to sell.
Yeah, so there are several mines like that. One's under Cleveland as well. under the lake at Cleveland. And so it has a huge impact. It's having a growing impact on the shorelines of the Great Lakes, but also the inland lakes. It's where it's showing up worse because it's impacting the macroinvertebrates in the lakes. It can impact the fish. So it's really out in the ecosystem where we're having the worst problems. It hasn't really impacted drinking water, or it hasn't been too impactful on the wastewater pipes because the water moves through there so quickly. So you don't have long periods of that salt sitting in there. It's being diluted generally pretty quickly as it goes to the stormwater system. But when it goes into a lake, it really becomes a problem and we're seeing the levels of salts in the lakes move up steadily. So I think that's where we're going to have the big problems, is in the ecosystem itself. That's a great question. Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about affordability. And climate is already impacting the affordability of water. And so when I say affordability, this is a pretty broad thing for us. The most intuitive is, how much does your drinking water cost and can you afford it? In Detroit, for example, your drinking water bill, your wastewater bill, and your stormwater bill are all together. And the average bill for those three is about $140 a month. That's an average bill. A lot of people in Detroit cannot afford those bills. The UN and US EPA recommend no more than 2.5% to 3.5% be spent on drinking water, and another 2% on the other water charges. So in Detroit, you can have people paying 10 and 15% of their family income for their water bill. So that is a huge issue, and it's being impacted by a great number of things. It's impacted by old infrastructure and having to replace that, having lead lines and replacing those. But it's also on the stormwater side. And as climate impacts that more, we have to shore up our stormwater systems. That only adds to that burden of creating new infrastructure at very large cost, and then the ratepayers having to pay for those. So a recent study out of MSU, actually, where the terrible news of a shooting is happening, I guess now, a study from there has estimated that by 2022, last year, 1/3 of US homes would be above that affordability measure. So their bill would be more than their combined bill, more than 4.5% of their household income. So we're very concerned about that, and we're concerned that the ways climate and other things are impacting those bills. And Flint, by the way, has the highest bills in the country, and yet people still don't drink their water there. So Michigan has some real issues. Other states in the Great Lakes also have some of those same issues, but unfortunately, Michigan seems to be kind of the poster child for water issues in the Great Lakes state. I couldn't have this conversation without talking about lead. We work on lead because it's still an ongoing issue. It's across the country. It's not, of course, just in the Great Lakes. We're going to have to get these pipes out. We're going to have to get them out relatively quickly because they're becoming more unstable. And we see the water systems are having more and more difficulty maintaining the corrosion control that prevents that lead from getting into the water. We monitor the exceedances of lead across the Great Lakes, and there are far too many happening these days, some of them for long periods of time. And because lead is so toxic, we definitely want to get those lead lines out. We're working on reducing those costs. So we work with a group called Blue Conduit, and they actually use AI, machine learning, to estimate where most of the lead pipes are. Usually as cities don't have a good inventory of where they are. And so by using this machine learning and data collection, they're able to more closely pinpoint where the cities should start work and look for those lead lines. So that's the type of cost reducing measure we're looking at to prevent these rates from going up again. So we created a Flint youth water testing program. This came out of the Flint water crisis during the crisis. And we worked with the community. They said, there's no way to get people to use this water again or to trust anything anyone is telling us unless you work with our youth. And so that's what we did. As a result of that, we built the first of its kind in the world community water lab now. It's the Flint Community Water Lab. It's run by Flint residents. It trains high school and college students to be chemists, water technicians, outreach specialists. At the same time, it is testing every home in Flint for free as many times as they want to have their homes tested, trying to bring back some trust that people can use their water, because it's so harmful not to be able to use your water for anything. Some people won't bathe in it. They're very distrustful because of what happened during the water crisis. So that lab is an example of where we go in and work with a community, and they tell us what they need, and we try to figure out how to make that happen. And in this case, that's what they told us. They wanted a lab, and so now they have one.
Is there water still coming from the Flint River?
No, and the Flint River was actually never the problem.
Oh.
They are actually on the Detroit system. So they were on the Detroit system, and then their city government was removed because of financial issues, and an appointed emergency manager was put in to make all the decisions for them. And it was that emergency manager that decided to have them use a different pipeline, which would have been the Karagandhi pipeline, instead of the pipeline that comes from the same place, but through the Great Lakes Water Authority, part of the Detroit system. And when they did that, the problem is actually that they didn't use corrosion control. And so corrosion control costs about $100 a month. And they made the decision not to make that expenditure. River water is naturally more acidic than lake water. They were getting, prior to that, they were getting water out of Lake Huron. And by not putting in the corrosion control, that's what caused the problem. And as a result, that cost about $180 million, I believe, at a minimum, to rectify what resulted. So yeah, they only were on the Flint River for a short time, and then they were put back on Lake Huron water. Unfortunately, the damage had been done, the pipes had been scoured, and the lead was exposed. And so it takes a long time to build up that corrosion control again. So I wanted to talk a little bit about just another toxin that you're probably aware of. It's a huge problem in the Great Lakes states. PFAS, or per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. These are the things that are on nonstick pans, on our rainproof boots and rainwear. They're on McDonald's hamburger wrappers. You know, the stuff is everywhere. And unfortunately, it is worst in water, right? So what they knew in the 40s when they decided to keep going forward with these substances was that they should never be allowed to get in water because they move so quickly and easily in water. Unfortunately, that cat is way out of the bag. And so we used to have a PFAS testing program because there were so many concerns with PFAS there are so many concerns with PFAS in drinking water. This map is from our partners at Environmental Working Group. They're trying to keep up with where states are testing. The reason that this is so blotchy is only because of where people are testing. It's not that they're not everywhere. It's just these are the places that are testing first. So PFAS, they're extremely toxic. They cause all kinds of cancers and other health issues at parts per trillion, not billion, but per trillion. So EPA just recently released some new studies that confirm what we thought from other countries' studies, that basically no amount of this stuff is safe. It's like lead. It's really, you shouldn't have it in you, but it's in the grain now. It's ubiquitous throughout the world. So some of the things that we're working on to try and combat this as a human health issue is trying to get testing done in all the states, have the states test every drinking water source, and also to make technologies for removing it where it already exists for people's drinking water. So, I started in resource extraction. Resource extraction is a big issue for freshwater. Toxics are a huge issue for freshwater. And because PFAS are so mobile in water, as climate makes this worse, climate can make it worse by just the overflow. So we don't know where it is, but when a river runs over or a lake is now moving somewhere else, this stuff can really quickly move. And so these are some of the things we really want to push on solutions. There are some potential solutions coming up for PFAS. Several universities have found ways to break the bonds. The reason it's so good is because it repels water, but it has these very, very strong fluoride bonds. And there are some new technologies that look like they are successfully breaking the bonds, but of course we have to wait until they can be made to scale. But this is a huge freshwater issue, and it's a huge drinking water issue as well. But it also has impacts on flora and fauna as well. Deer, fish, and they accumulated, unfortunately, so then we can be eating that as well.
So are all of these dots that are on there, sorry.
You're fine. Sorry. There we go.
Are they all places where something has been tested, or are all places where something has been found?
Found.
Okay.
Yes, these are places where something has been found. You'll see the purple ones are military sites. That's where it's the worst almost universally, unless it's a 3M site or another place that was making the stuff.
Well, you can certainly see where the Central Valley waterways are in the California.
Yeah, it's really, it's shocking. You'll see Michigan has a lot. That's because they did a drinking water testing program very early on. And so they were moving that more quickly. Similar with New Jersey. New Jersey was very quick on this one. They have a lot of plants. So yeah, it's something to definitely be aware of. I'm going to go back up a couple of slides, and then we'll just jump into conversation or questions. I missed a couple when I moved around earlier. I want to talk a little about toxic algal blooms. I'm sure you have them in California. We have lots and lots of them. What you're seeing here in the larger picture, that's the outlet of the Detroit River going into Lake Erie. And Lake Erie in the summer can have algae that is feet thick on the surface of the water. It is toxic and deadly. It kills dogs and all kinds of wildlife every summer. We've now learned that just from exercising, like if you run near the lake while there's a huge bloom like this, it can do you can get lung damage just from running by the lake. So these toxic algal blooms are becoming more and more prevalent around the lakes, both inland lakes and the Great Lakes. And it's a huge problem with runoff, nutrient runoff. Lake Erie in particular, it is primarily agricultural runoff. There are 4 million acres in agriculture in the largest stream that flows into Lake Erie. And that agriculture is primarily in CAFOs, large animal feeding operations, where they're spreading manure, not for nutrients, but for manure management at this point. So this is a huge issue that we're working on, and it's becoming a bigger issue in many places, and it's exacerbated by climate because of those warmer temperatures. Lake Erie is very shallow. That's why it's susceptible to this algae. It warms up very quickly. It's only about 30 feet deep on this on the western end. And when we get all this runoff in there of phosphorus, it really lets that algae go crazy. And then it produces a toxin called microcystin. And it closed down the Toledo water system for 3 days. 500,000 people couldn't drink or touch their water. It is that toxic, you can't touch it. So that's one. We're working on the nutrient side of this. We're trying to work with farms to figure out how do we reduce the amount of manure being spread and spread at the wrong times. But it's certainly an ongoing issue to try and figure out this nutrient issue and how do we stop these blooms.
Is it going on? Wasn't Lake Erie where they had acid rain and it got cleared up? This doesn't sound like it's so cleared up. But it's
So yeah, well, to be honest, the Great Lakes states used to send our acid rain to New England. So we all built big 300-foot stacks for our coal burners. They would send the stuff then over to New England, and it would rain down as acid rain in New England. Interestingly, though, what you may also remember from Lake Erie was it was on fire. Not the lake itself, but the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland burned about 5 times. And it was those fires on the river that really set in motion creating the Clean Water Act in 1970.
In Chicago, they had the Fox River burning.
Yes, exactly. And at that point, we did have algae like this in Lake Erie. And at that point, it was from public sewer works. They weren't good enough. They weren't taking out enough phosphorus. So we've improved that. And it was also from detergents. We had high phosphorus laundry and dish detergents at that point. And so through the Clean Water Act, those were taken out. Lake Erie came back famously. It was beautiful and glorious. And it still is at times and in places. But you do get these blooms. Some years they're worse than others. So yeah, we're unfortunately kind of looking at a problem we solved once, we're having to solve again. Then invasive species, huge freshwater problem. Oh, I'm sorry, Linda, did you have a question?
Yes, I wondered what was actually what was burning in that in the river, in the Cuyahoga River. What?
Well, it was a lot of refineries, so it was probably floating oil and things from refineries.
So it wasn't, phosphorus doesn't burn.
No, it was not phosphorus. It was not.
Just checking.
Yeah, that was the impetus, one of the impetus for moving the Clean Water Act forward. Yeah.
Thank
Good
you.
question. I don't know if you know this invasive, but it's called the sea lamprey. It's very routine here. We have to control for it in the Great Lakes. Those are teeth. They suck onto the side of a fish, and they are a parasite, obviously, and they will eventually kill a large fish, salmon, things like that. So it costs us millions of dollars a year to just control the lamprey. We have not been able to get anywhere near getting rid of it. Some newer, this one's an old one. We have some newer ones, the mussels, zebra mussel, Kayaga mussel, and now new carp species are all big threats. Lake Michigan, the bottom of that food chain has been pretty much wiped out by the mussels because they are such efficient filter feeders. But the interesting thing is the mussels also, they cycle the nutrients in a different way than the ecosystem is used to. And so they make it available in the form that the algae like. So the mussels are also adding to the algae problem. So you have climate change warming things up, you have mussels making it available, and you have a lot of agriculture coming in with plenty of nutrients to add in, and it becomes a real problem. And then my final slide is about diversions. So if you have over 80% of the country's fresh surface water, you think a lot about how do we keep it? How do we make sure that it is an ongoing resource for generations to come? The Great Lakes were a gift from the glaciers, I like to say. They were carved out 10,000 years ago by the receding glaciers, and they are basically a balanced system. So we lose about 1% to evaporation, and 1% goes out to the ocean through Montreal and beyond. And we get about 1% in precipitation each year. Now that's getting a little less clear that it's balanced as climate change is coming in. And so that's one of our huge concerns. The other thing is that there are what we call diversions from the lakes. So where you see, like at Chicago, that's the Lake Michigan diversion is one allowed by the Supreme Court. And that diversion is about 6 billion gallons a day. It's a lot of water going down through the Chicago Shipping and Sanitary Canal, and then it winds up in the Mississippi River. And the reason for that is because Chicago used to take its water from Lake Michigan and return its water to Lake Michigan, and people died in the early 1900s. Many people died. And so through feats of engineering, they turned the Chicago River around, and it no longer flows into Lake Michigan, it flows out of Lake Michigan. So that is a legal diversion, but nonetheless one that is quite large and that we all keep an eye on. And then we have some that come in as well. So at the top, for example, you see the Agoki diversion, and that is one that's coming in from bays in Canada. So luckily for now, those are basically balanced as well, but those are all things that we look at, of course, when we see very low water levels. Oh my goodness, are we diverting too much water? There is a law that prevents diversions, large-scale diversions from the Great Lakes now in both Canada and the US. And so it's pretty tightly regulated. But as climate change changes things, we're definitely concerned. So I'm going to just skip back to my last slide. Sorry about the confusion there. But that's really my presentation for the evening. You're welcome if you, I'd love to stay and talk with you and take questions and have a conversation. But after this, if you'd like to look up Freshwater Future, you're welcome to do that on our website, or also send me an email. I'm happy to answer questions and things like that. So I just want to say thank you for letting me have this opportunity to talk with you all. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts about all these freshwater issues. But for me, this is my life's work. I really love the lakes. I just am all about water. I paddle as often as I can, and so to me, this is one of the most important things I can be doing. And I appreciate your interest and willingness to listen. Thank you.
Anyone can unmute themselves and ask questions if they would like, or raise your hand, whichever you prefer.
I can start with one comment or two, I think. The League of Women Voters that we're part of in California has a fairly active water management oversight, I guess you would say. They look at what's happening and they put it together, and they make recommendations to the government. And we tried to do a agreement with Oregon or some other state to try and have some people go to the central committee meeting. Oh, it must have been a year and a half ago or so. I can't remember exactly. But most of the people in the East Coast were like, why bother? And we're like, no, this is really important. So maybe when I run into some of these other people, I can say, hey, why don't you go look up the Freshwater Future and see if they'll help. So
absolutely. And I would also suggest that if you can get in touch with the Lake Michigan League of Women Voters, they are extremely strong on water issues, and we work with them pretty extensively. And they cover all Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana. So they have a pretty big area that they work in.
That sounds great, because the thing is, I think that people, when you're looking just at your lakes, you don't realize that maybe the same problem is happening in somebody else's valleys. So
great point. Yeah, thanks for that.
Okay.
Linda, did you want to go?
Yeah, about the zebra mussels, there was talk, I don't know whether it was foolish or serious, about promoting the zebra mussels as food. Is there anything?
Well, I'll give you my 2 cents. When I was in my grad work, I worked on toxicology, and I think I wouldn't want to eat those mussels from the lakes they'd be coming out of. Mussels, you eat the whole thing, right? A scallop, you eat the mussel, but a mussel, you eat the whole animal. And they hold so much of that stuff that they filter, that I think that has been a concern with trying to do something like that. The other thing is zebra mussels are actually pretty small. So you're talking like a nickel size or a quarter.
Oh my gosh.
So they would be really tough to use.
Yeah. Okay, that question is settled. But also, I had thought they had come through Chicago by way of the Mississippi, that they entered that way.
I believe they did, and they also were transported on watercraft. The little larvae, the veligers, they travel really nicely in boat wells. So yes, they did come from the south, and they came north. And unfortunately, the Chicago Sanitary and Shipping Canal also allows species to move from the Great Lakes to the Mississippi that they don't want from us either. So it's an unfortunate two-way thing that we're trying to get a handle on, working with locks and new technology to stop things from moving through that channel. Yes.
Thank
you. Absolutely. Great questions. Yes. The SNITs.
Go ahead.
Oh. We've lived in the Detroit area most of our life. Right now, we're in the West Coast. But I have memories of Rick Snyder and his harebrained schemes, you know, to use the Flint River. Did he ever go to jail for that?
He did not, unfortunately, and the Attorney General in Michigan finally did let him off. I think he has one misdemeanor he may still be in court for.
He was the former governor of Michigan during the
Yes,
Flint
sorry.
crisis.
Yeah, he was in charge while people were poisoned, and it's very unfortunate. You're
And he went to
absolutely right.
Flint and lied to them.
I don't really know, but I am guessing he's the last Republican governor of Michigan.
Oh, wow.
No,
Okay, let's, this is okay.
Yeah, I don't know either, Frank, but that was definitely tragic. Any other thoughts or questions?
I have a comment, a couple, too. You mentioned the Environmental Working Group. A number of years ago, we had them speak to us out here, but
Right.
we didn't touch upon those issues, but they do a lot of good work.
They really do. And if I could just put in another plug for something of theirs, on their website, you can search for drinking water database. And you can put in your zip code and it will show you all the things that are in your specific water system. So if it's things left over from chlorination, if it's lead, whatever it is, and it gives you not only the legal parameters, but what EWG thinks is safe. And I recommend that database highly, highly. If you haven't checked it out, it's very useful.
That's great. We have also had speakers from East Bay Mud, the East Bay Municipal Utility District, which is our water. We're very fortunate because it comes from the Sierras and it's in better shape than most. But also a number of years ago, I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but you might be. We had Arlene Blum talk to us about PFAS.
Oh, yes. Yes. That's great.
And I ran into her yesterday at the farmers market.
Nice. I love it.
But she did a lot of work on that. And that's the first time I really heard about it. That's quite a few years ago, but it was, I mean, she has all this list of how many bad chemicals there are. And then a few of them get fixed, but then they get replacements that are just as bad. So we don't seem to really be winning that battle.
Well, certainly not on PFAS. There are over 10,000 different ones.
Mm-hmm.
But I will give you some good news on that front.
Good.
The 3M just agreed that after 2025, they will not produce them anymore. And I'm sure that is because of the lawsuits. All the Great Lakes states are suing them. I believe California has sued. Many, many states have been suing for the damage that they're now having to try to mediate.
And you had spoken about the lakes and runoffs and things. I mean, the Bay Area is still getting toxic waste from the gold mines that were pretty far away from us, coming down the Sacramento River, and the effects of that, if you monetize it out, I've read, exceed the value of all the gold that was mined.
Yeah, I think that's true. If you've never seen pictures of Sudbury, Ontario, after the mining there, it's a good thing to look up. The water used to run across the ground and it was orange. And, you know, though Sudbury is, it's not completely remediated, but they had to spend, I'm sure, more than they got out of that extraction. Now, I still drive a car. So, you know, I always try to think about the reality that I can't drive a car if we're not extracting things. But both, you know, the idea of conserving and recycling what we are using, and really requiring companies to provide better practices. Some of these things we're seeing where, you know, you whether it's manure lagoon that is overtopped and now the whole city is in manure, or it's a tailings pond that it breaks open because it hasn't been properly maintained and now it's all downstream like we saw in Colorado several years ago. We really have to look at longer term, not only the climate changes, right? So we have to engineer for much bigger events. But we also have to enforce these things over time. And we believe that we should be requiring long-term bonds. So if you're going to take on a very risky thing like mining and have open tailing ponds, then you have to provide a long-term bond that will provide for the remediation of that over time. Good points, very good points.
We also have to look at the same issues with the invasive species that you do, because the shipping comes in through the Golden Gate into our main area and all the way up to Sacramento. And I think they're working on trying to get some things to get them to have to do different practices, but I don't think it's
We're testing them here in the Great Lakes. Actually, the U.S. Coast Guard tests those technologies here. And so they are looking at UV technologies, probably the most promising, I think. So putting UV lights inside the ballast containers of the ships so that when they have to take on ballast water, they can sterilize that water before they have to let it out again. So we're hoping, because yeah, ballast is a huge issue here, and I know it is for you all as well. Yeah. And we really have to find those solutions and then get them on the ships. I think right now we're seeing it's something that's really promising. How quickly we can make them get it on board for cost is going to be the next hurdle, I think.
I saw also recently an article about a cruise ship that got stuck off the coast of Australia because they wouldn't let it on because it didn't meet their requirements of not having these things.
I appreciate that. Like, I don't want a ship stuck and endangering people, of course, but yeah, I think looking at that international transportation is really huge. And you know, for example, right now in the Great Lakes, the biggest ship you can bring in is 1,000-footer. We call them salties. No, we call them Lakers, and the bigger ones are called salties that go in the ocean. There is talk of wanting to make the locks bigger so they could bring in the salties, and we just know that would be more issues, not only far more traffic, bigger boats and bigger bow waves in this small system, but also the problem of more transportation of those invasives. Mm-hmm. Yes, Linda.
Yeah, I have a house on one of the smaller inland lakes in Michigan, and our problem is people. It's a beautiful lake. It's spring-fed, very deep and spring-fed. But people want to put houses on the lake now with lawns on them, which require fertilizer, and that's our current fight. You know, why do you come up here and want to build a house that looks like it's in the city, you know, or something like that? That's our fight now is, you know, keep the lake clean, don't, and so many it's a problem.
You don't live on Torch, do you?
Yes. And you can
One of
find,
my favorites.
you can find exactly where I am. If you look on Google Maps on the south end of Torch is very straight,
Yeah.
except for one spot that sticks out. That's us.
Oh, nice. I will definitely look. I love to paddle on Torch.
Oh, yeah.
Amazing lake.
Because,
I
and
think you're having
yeah.
problems with brown algae now, I think. Is that right?
Oh, dear Lord.
I'm pretty sure you're having brown algae.
Oh, dear. No, I
Um,
don't know it, but you know, they've had problems like that attracting people like to feed the ducks, which is terrible because we didn't have ducks on the shoreline. Now we've got swimmer's itch from
Oh,
the
yeah.
parasites from the ducks.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and it's a battle because it's become so popular, and there's so many people that are coming up, and the you know, the ones that come up and I can't think of, there's, you know, we're on a very shallow end of the lake, and then there's the extremely shallow where people gather their boats and just climb out into the water, and it's driving everybody crazy.
That actually made national news last summer because it got so big. Yeah, crazy. Big parties.
Oh, yeah. And they park their cars along the road, along the lake, Crystal Beach Road, and sleep in the cars.
It's so crazy, but I totally agree with you. And I will say that, you know, some of the groups we've worked with in the past have had similar problems, concerns about neighboring property owners and using phosphorus-based fertilizers. That's the limiting nutrient up there. And so they've gotten more bans on phosphorus fertilizer. It can't be sold in their counties anymore. And so things like that are certainly possible. And then also Walloon, you probably know Walloon Lake. They do an amazing job with encouraging naturalized shorelines. They have contests every year. So it might be something worth looking at is you know, how other lake associations are really making sure that at least as many as possible are naturalizing their shorelines.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Any other? Oh, yes.
Ruby.
Hi, Ruby.
Hi, Jill. I thought that Benton Harbor, a few years ago, Benton Harbor, Michigan also had problems with their water supply. And I don't think I ever heard anything about the resolution of that situation.
It's a great question. Thank you. Yes, we work every day in Benton Harbor, like we did in Flint a few years ago. So we helped build what's called the Benton Harbor Community Water Council, and they now hold the government to task. But it took 3 years, and we finally 20 organizations petitioned the EPA to say, look, the state is not doing their enforcement job. They're not making the city do anything about this, and you've got to act. And so the EPA did come in. There were 21 violations when they went into the water plant. Yeah, it was bad. But as a result, the governor came up with $20 million. And as of last week, all but one lead line had been replaced. So it did result in them replacing the lead lines, which is a great victory. But now you still have the issue of building back trust and you know, making sure that water system is safe and sustainable, because it's another one that was hit by emergency management. The problems with that system came during emergency management. But they are doing much better. And we have been supporting, the Water Council has been delivering water in trucks twice a week carrying them into everyone's house. And also they go in and they install filters and teach people how to maintain the filters. So some good things have come out of it. And I can assure you in Flint and Benton Harbor, people are paying attention to the quality of their water forever. Yeah, great question. Thank you.
Therese, did you have a question? You're muted. You're muted. We can't hear you. You're muted, Therese. Unmute.
Sometimes we can ask the participant to unmute and then that will tell them where.
Can you unmute?
Yeah, I've been trying to ask her to unmute,
Okay,
to your point, Jill.
A minute. Okay,
There
now,
she is.
Ah,
there you go. Bravo.
Well, it's been very interesting hearing about all this, because I've never been to the Great Lakes. I've always wanted to go there. So that's one of my big hopes that, before I'm too old to go there, to go quickly, I guess.
I hope you get to, because they are truly amazing.
Oh, I'm sure they are. Yeah, I've heard about them so much. And, it's just that it's a little harder for me to travel now, but I haven't given up.
Good.
So
That's great.
it's really interesting to hear your point of view, though, because you've been there, kind of like you've been there and done that.
Yes, indeed. Well, I appreciate that. And I hope you get to go see them and if you can, see Lake Superior.
I guess the thing to do is to look for a tour that would really be concentrated on that, wouldn't it? Be some kind of tour of the Great Lakes.
Yeah, and there are even cruise ships in the Great Lakes now.
And cruise ships, yeah, because that would be easier for travel, more not having to run around and all that, being more stable.
Yep.
I am tempted to go on a cruise this year after all this COVID business.
There you go. Maybe it can be a Great Lakes cruise. They're much smaller.
Yeah, that would be, maybe I should look into that. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay.
I mentioned that Walloon Lake hosts the University of Michigan camp.
Yeah. It's
And
famous.
also it's that lake, Walloon Lake, is a place that Ernest Hemingway spent his youth. They had a place up near there. It's a special place.
Yeah. Northern
There's so
Michigan
many
is,
lakes there that are wonderful.
it truly is. I miss it every day. I lived up north for 20 years before I moved here a couple of years ago, and it's just truly amazing. There aren't many places in the world like that. With very, even though there are problems, the waters are as close to pristine as I've ever seen.
Wow.
Yeah, for sure. And the University of Michigan Biostation too is on Douglas Lake up there.
I don't know.
And they've been a great partner for us.
We worked there decades ago.
Oh, nice. Yeah, excellent. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I spent a couple of weeks helping to teach.
They called it bug camp.
Bug camp.
Bug camp. I took my invertebrate class at bug camp. Yes.
Yeah, not far from Pellston, the refrigerator of Michigan.
Yeah,
That's right.
I mean, we could go on and on, but another interesting thing with climate change is the DNA problem with the moose on Isle Royal.
Yes.
And so their gene pool is shrinking. Yeah.
Yes. So if you don't know, Isle Royal is a pretty large island in the middle of Lake Superior. And
Very
it
close to
has a
I've never
population.
been, but it's the only national park in Michigan. At least it was.
It was, yeah.
And Louise
Now
just
you can
told
go to
me-
Sleeping Bear Dunes National Park. It used to be.
Well,
a
that's the National Lakeshore, not,
It was, but I think they made it.
oh, they made it into a
an
national park. Okay.
I think so, yeah.
And Louise just told me she had to cross it.
Well, that was, we portaged in those days that, long time ago. Yeah. But yeah, it's really interesting to hear all this stuff and, Lake, Tequamanon Falls and the brown color from the tannin and all the interesting phenomenon. Yeah.
So many interesting things up there. It's amazing. That's why the Pure Michigan brand really works. There's so many tourists now in Michigan that locals can't go camping because you can't get a reservation.
Jill, I put the lake up
business
behind
now.
me. It's frozen over. In
Oh,
the background.
nice. Well,
You
yeah.
can see the other side of the lake. It's completely flat and pure frozen and snow and everything.
And they're all amazing, but what I love about Torch is it used to be an arm of Lake Michigan. So you have the Grand Traverse Bays.
Yeah, the
And
double
Torch-
bays.
Yep, and Torch Lake used to be a bay.
Oh my.
So it would have been like little Grand Traverse Bay.
Oh my.
But because of that, the way it formed and its depth and everything, it has those diatoms that make the water Caribbean green. It is just amazing. Yeah, an
Yeah.
amazing place. But I also love Mud Pond on Walloon Lake. That is actually my favorite paddleboarding spot. So I use a different kind of boat on every lake.
I've seen yoga classes on paddle boards out.
Yeah, I don't really, it's more of a meditation experience for me than yoga. But I do like to paddleboard or canoe or kayak or whatever the lake calls for. Well, it's just been such a pleasure to have this conversation with all of you, and it's a great group. I wish you the best in your continued efforts, and I would be happy to connect you with the folks at the Lake Michigan League as well.
That would be great.
Thank you, great.
Yeah, I'll try to send their email.
Okay.
And I wish you all the best, and I thank you for giving me some time to learn about you all and what you're doing.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank
This
you.
was absolutely terrific. You have a question?
Or she's just.
Or are you just
Oh,
saying
yeah.
goodbye, Emily?
Yeah, I'm just saying
Okay.
bye-bye and thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bravo. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.